Hello, everyone. This is TAFSIG interview with Susie Cowley-Haselden, and this is about building knowledge through speaking assessment of academic reading circles. So hello, Susie. She's there. If you would like to tell us a little bit about your background, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm currently a senior teaching fellow at the University of Warwick, where I'm the course director of English for Academic Purposes on the International Foundation Programme. I've worked in EAP since 2009 after a long stint in EFL ESOL in FE. And really, I guess I'm here. I should preface this interview by saying I'm not an assessment expert, but I'm an EAP practitioner, and I'll be talking about using Seaburn's ARC model in my practice, which I've done for the last 8 years now. So, and it's also a key feature of my PhD, which I'm hopefully close to submitting in the next year.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, you've been using it very successfully. It was absolutely brilliant. You know, some of my best lessons were the ARCs on your course. Okay, Susie, thank you very much for agreeing.
That's not me, that's you.
Oh no. Right. Question one. Okay. So for practitioners who don't really know what ARCs are about, what's academic reading, so if you could explain it to us, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, first of all, if people are interested in learning more about the ARC, they absolutely should and must go to Tyson Seaburn's book, which is very kindly during the pandemic available for free, and there's a link in the reference list. But basically, it's an intensive reading approach where students read a text, an assigned text, and they are given different roles, and they perform these roles prior to a discussion. They come to the discussion, and through these lenses, as Tyson refers to them, they co-construct knowledge of the text to get a clearer idea of the meaning and the significance of the text. So the academic reading circle was developed by Tyson about 10 years ago now, inspired by literature circles which were happening in schools. So that's what it is in principle. In practice, students are given a text, like I've said, and they're assigned one of a series of roles. A discussion leader. The discussion leader is expected to control the discussion, make sure that everybody contributes and nobody dominates in the discussion, and also to obviously ask some discussion questions. There's a highlighter who's tasked with exploring the sort of key vocabulary in the article, and perhaps sort of key quotes from the article that sort of really stand out to them. And maybe even to police the use of that language within the discussion as well, making sure that terms are used accurately. There's a visualizer role where students are asked to get creative, draw, or maybe produce an infographic, or quite often they just find images on the internet that sort of are relevant to the content of the article and somehow explain the article in more visual terms. There's a connector whose task it is to connect this article perhaps with other readings or maybe personal experience or other experience. A contextualizer who is asked to find out a little bit about why this text was written, who wrote it, how it, sort of why it's relevant, why it's being read. There was initially, but it's not in Tyson's book, I've noticed the role of a summarizer, somebody to sort of summarize the article. Mm-hmm. The joy of the ARC really is, although Tyson Seaburn has those roles, you can play around with it. You can create whatever role you think is useful. So, for example, in the context I'm working in at the moment, we have an evaluator role who's tasked with sort of thinking a little bit about limitations of the article and problems with the article. Mm-hmm. So once students have prepared their roles, they come to a class and they sit and discuss. Now, it really is quite surprising the first time you do this. I don't know if it was your experience, Jo, but people can quite often be a bit, oh, well, they're not going to talk for very long, maybe 10 minutes. But actually, students do a brilliant job, and often I've had to stop conversations because the class is ending. So, you know, these discussions can go on for sort of 30, 45 minutes. And it's really impressive to see what students can do with them. Yeah, so I think really, in a nutshell, that's what an ARC is.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so our next question is, and actually you can see ARC here. This image is wonderful, Susie. Thank you for this one.
Oh, don't thank me, thank Pixabay.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's from Pixabay.
All right.
Free, yeah.
Fabulous. Okay, so question 2, why ARC as a speaking assessment on an EAP course?
That's a really good question. I think I'm going to start, if it's all right, Jo, with why ARC. Cover that bit first. It really is, well, it's really authentic. So in previous EAP courses I've worked on, speaking assessments have been presentations or group discussion based on some sort of generic topic. So the ARC format, I think, is much more authentic and develops much more important skills for going on to study in higher education than traditional language tests do. You know, getting people to interact and to critique and to co-construct knowledge and to really engage with the text. These are all really, really important things. The wonderful thing about ARC is, and I know at times I can sound a little bit evangelical about it, but it really kind of acculturates students in quite a holistic way into being a sort of, well, I've used them a lot with postgraduates, so definitely in a postgraduate community within a university. And the key thing for me is the knowledge building and the empowerment that comes with it. So if the texts are chosen carefully, and this is what I've looked at in my PhD, then there is real scope to build knowledge over a period of time. And I know time is kind of a much needed commodity on EAP courses, but if it's a good investment of time. And with that knowledge building, when students can start to see that they are building knowledge of something, and in my research I've looked at theory, comes with it a huge increase in confidence, not just in speaking, but in students' kind of ability to be academic, actually.
Yes.
And also for them to truly value an academic discussion and to see that they can learn from it with their peers. So that's really quite a good thing, and they do feel much more confident and I think much more empowered. So there's lots of reasons why it's a good thing to use, and I think if it's going to be used in the classroom, I think it makes for a very good assessment. I wouldn't ever use it really as an assessment without students being very familiar with the format. One thing I also like about the ARC is it does allow them to feel a little uncomfortable. So at the beginning, whilst they're trying to figure out what they're doing, they do feel a bit uncomfortable, and I think they start to become comfortable with that, which I think is really good. So I think they need a fair bit of training. But I think it's because of the authenticity of it, the holistic kind of nature of what's happening in this discussion. It's not just showing that they've read and that they've understood or that they know how to reference, but it's all these, you know, making these connections to other things, interacting with people, and that co-construction of knowledge is great. So that's why I think it's a useful assessment, especially when people are interested as well in more integrated assessments. So, you know, you can assess reading through speaking or even listening. It doesn't have to be a reading text. So that's why.
Lovely. Okay, thank you ever so much. That's really, really useful. Question 3, well, really builds on question 2, I would say. So now how do you do it? If we would like to know a little bit more about the mechanics of actually doing it. So how do you assess speaking using ARC?
Well, I think it very much depends on your context. It depends how you've used it, how you've tailored it to your context, and thinking about what your students are going to need when they go on to their academic studies, if you're looking in a pre-sessional context, or even in an in-sessional context. What I like to do, because in my opinion, building knowledge on an EAP program isn't given enough attention. I'm not talking about knowledge about language, we do that, but I think just the general building of knowledge about theory in the case of my research, or of a given topic, isn't really given enough attention. So I always think that in the assessment criteria, it should be sort of split 50-50 content and language. So the language element of the criteria obviously would satisfy any UKVI requirements. But then I think it's important to acknowledge the hard work the students have put in to engage with the text, and to sort of jointly construct an understanding of the text and some knowledge of it. And again, I think it's assessing sort of those skills that perhaps other language tests, or more, what's the word, the CELTs, the traditional CELTs, perhaps don't get to test with an individual speaking test. So that sort of interaction and asking for clarification and being able to synthesize and relate and connect to other things. I think all of that should be included in the criteria. But in terms of practicalities, well, you could do it as you would do it based around one text and ask students to perform different roles. One thing I've tended to do in the past, which I think works quite nicely, is sort of turn the ARC into a bit of a student-led seminar, and perhaps get students to find one article each, and then, having done the ARC on several occasions, they become well versed in all of the roles. And that's the ultimate aim, is that when a student approaches a text, they automatically visualize and connect and contextualize themselves. So I think it works nicely as a sort of end, or towards the end of course assessment, for students to demonstrate that they can do all those things, and then bring that together in the text they've chosen or been assigned, and then lead into a larger discussion. I don't know if that answers your question, whether you'd like me to say anything more.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if you could give us any more sort of detail, because from what I remember, I think you were assessing participation. It was one of the criteria. I think preparation for the role it was. So talking about the content criticality or something like that. And then the language you mentioned as well, the 50-50 sort of split. The language was pronunciation for sure.
Yeah.
Vocabulary, wasn't it?
Yeah. Sort of
range
accuracy,
and accuracy, density, because I remember talking about, how important this is for students to sort of be able to say and say the right word. It's so for example, the structure of they get the grammar wrong, depending on what it is, of course, what's the problem, but it's not necessarily such a big problem. The bigger problem might be sometimes if they use the wrong word, and then they aren't being understood. And really important point, I think, what you said about the interaction sort of part of this, because this is something that is not really assessed when we assess speaking using presentations, for example, because that interaction isn't there. And this is actually, it's interesting because, from the research findings, this is actually when learning happens during that interaction, and speaking and listening, actually, and doing something like that, like ARC provides all that. From my point of view. And how you would describe using ARC, a one text or one reading text or one listening text or two texts or several texts. I just wanted to mention the what we did here in my current context. We used two texts. We did one listening and one reading on the same topic. I think it was climate change. And students devised a research question. So it was like like an oral critical response. And I think that was the third arc. And it was really, really great to see how the students started with that question. And then when they were finishing the arc, they actually finished with sort of attempting to answer that research question using those two texts. It's really, really exciting to watch. And I'm just thinking how useful it would be to do it more often.
Yeah. I think one thing I would say from experience, I don't know if you'd agree, Jo, is to don't be disheartened. You've got to give it a couple of goes, and you've got to be prepared for the first go to be messy.
Yes.
to not really go how you expect it to. It's a radically different approach to what a lot of students are used to doing. So I had a student actually the other day say to me, in my country we concentrate more on the conclusion, the answer. Right. We're not interested, or we're not assessed, or we're not given any extra, merit for how we got there. And so he was finding the art process a little bit, he was like, when I said to him, the whole point is you come to the discussion and you might have questions and you might not clearly understand the article, but it's through the discussion that you come out the other side thinking, okay, I've got a better understanding of this now. All these different lenses have helped me build a bigger picture, a better picture. And he's enjoying it, actually. He's enjoying it, but it's very different for him. So I think don't be discouraged by it going terribly wrong the first time. The first time students often treat it, it's quite stilted, and students will sort of present the information they found, and it's just a series of right, you speak, your turn. And there's not always a lot of interaction, but they ease into it. And they take ownership of it.
Once they get that they can really ask any questions, so once they get the message that they actually can challenge the texts, or challenge what somebody else said during the arc, I think this is when it actually that's how it was for me. This is when it really gets going, and this is when it gets exciting for them. So they sort of go beyond presenting their roles only. They actually start realizing, oh, so now I can really go beyond. I can really explore. I can challenge. I can agree, ask questions, answer questions, and do all of those things. I remember one student a few years ago. It was a student who wasn't very good in, with regards to attendance, but he would never miss Friday because we had arcs on Friday. So this is very encouraging, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that shows the value. I mean, when I used to use arcs on in-sessional work that I did at a previous institution with postgraduates studying media, and they actually weren't doing their core reading for their modules. So this is how I got into using them. It came about with talking to a lecturer in the department who just was telling me about the external examiner who said, student work, they're not engaging enough with their reading. They're not reading enough, and they're not bringing it into their work. And I said, I've heard of something that might help. So we started playing around with the arc, and students would choose something from their core reading list for their modules. And they loved it, and they felt so much more confident because we would do it before their lectures the next week. So they went into their lectures and their seminars with some of their own ideas, and they'd become familiar with the vocabulary. But even if students hadn't read the article, even if students hadn't prepared, they would still come to that discussion because they could see the value of what they could learn from it.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
You mentioned PG students, but I've been doing it for foundation students, so maybe they sometimes need more scaffolding, and maybe they need more tries and more goes, or maybe smaller groups, not necessarily 6 people arc, maybe 3 people or 4 people. But like you said, it takes a while, but then eventually most of them usually get there. And I think there's value for the students for knowledge building and all sorts of knowledge. Including the language knowledge, but also the other things that you've mentioned before. this is why why I would definitely try and sort of push for it a bit more.
Yeah,
in EAP.
Yeah, I mean, you've just reminded me of something as well I wanted to bring up, actually. There's a recent article, I think it's in the Jeep, by Newman et al. It's in the references. And it's actually about source use. It's got nothing to do with speaking. But the point that they make about source use is that when students have a better understanding of the text and have developed a greater range of vocabulary around the text, then they are much better at using the sources, and there's much sort of lower incidence of plagiarism. And that's exactly what the ARC does. You know,
Yes.
I don't think we give enough time to developing knowledge and real understanding necessarily. I mean, we use text, don't we, all the time for language and as exemplars for writing, and it's you know, it serves that sort of purpose and it serves it well. But actually taking the time to sort of stop and choosing those texts carefully, not just for the language that they exemplify, but for the knowledge within it.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's really important. That article, I think, is a interesting read.
Okay, that really takes me to the last question. Yeah, which is what would you recommend? So you've already recommended one. Thank you very much, and we've got the reference list there. But yes, what literature, what reading, or what listening you would recommend for us? You know, for EAP professionals who would be interested in using ARC for building knowledge, for speaking assessment, or for any sort of thing, really.
Well, you just threw listening in there, Jo. I wasn't prepared for that. Okay, well, I knew I should have predicted it, shouldn't I, really? Right, well, in terms of literature, I'm really sorry to say that there's not much, I have to say.
There isn't, I know.
So obviously there's Tyson Seaburn's book, which the link's there. It's available for free at the moment. So that's the starting point. There's the link, there's reference there for the Newman article, which is the Jeep. So that's a really, really interesting article, I think, because of focusing on that sort of comprehension and knowledge of text it's really nice to see, actually, that being foregrounded. And I know this is awful, and I hate to have put 2 articles I've written on there. But there really isn't. There's slim pickings. so you got 2 of mine.
That's the reason we're interviewing you about this and not somebody else.
Anyway, so I apologize profusely, but they're 2 articles that are based on my PhD research. So it does the Learner Diaries one talks that's got a lot of sort of what students have said about going through the ARC process. So that's quite an interesting look, basically for the student quotes, not for what I've written, but looking at how students feel about going through the ARC process. And then the other article talks a little bit more about how I've used ARCs to develop what I've termed theory knowledgeability. So not just a knowledge of theory of what it is, but also how to use theory and how it's applied. So a knowledge of a theory in itself, a particular example. So there's not much written, but I know that ARCs are used widely by the EAP community. It'd be really nice to see more people write about them and research them.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, when you say listening, actually, one thing that did pop into my mind is there have been over the years quite a few presentations. I know, for example, ARCs are used at the University of Sheffield. So there's been presentations. So I think if people went to the Barleap website and maybe had a look back at previous PIMs or conferences, I'm sure they would find at least one presentation about people using ARC in their practice.
Maybe I could search for that, and then I could pop it on our website as well, to go with this as a reference, as another reference. Yeah, lovely. Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Susie. Thank you very much for your time and sort of explaining all of this and telling us, what it did to you and your students.
It's all right, a pleasure. Thank you.
It was fantastic to just, and I did read Building Knowledge to Ease, this article, but I didn't see using Learner Diaries yet. So I'm going to explore that next, and then Newman as well.
Yeah. Yes, it's a good article, the Newman one. I like it. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, thank you ever so much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Pleasure. Bye bye.